Welcome to Magical Books for Kids, a podcast sponsored by Magic Everywhere, Inc., a company based in Florida. Hosted by Michael John Sullivan, this is your place to hear the very best children's stories and an opportunity to get to know your favorite authors. Now, here is Michael John Sullivan.
Hello, everyone. I'm Michael John Sullivan, and thank you for joining us for Magical Books for Kids podcast. It's sponsored by Magic Everywhere, Inc., a company based in Kissimmee, Florida. Today, we have children's author Kathy Fellure, and she is the author of four children's illustrated storybooks called the Blake Sisters Lake Tahoe Adventures. Her new series of 5 contemporary women's novels, Across the Pond, will debut in 2021 with The Wrong Ocean. The second novel, Harper House, releases in 2022. These are stories that travel between England and different American states. Kathy is also a member of the Sacramento branch of Historical Novel Society and the California Writers Club. She hosts an annual literary read at Hine and Company Bookstore, as well as Sherlockine Baker Street West in Jackson, California. She has hosted, wrote, and produced the TSPN TV show for authors, writers, books, and beyond. She also guest speaks as well. She currently lives in the foothill of gold country of California with her family and 3 stand-up comedian rescue dogs. Kathy, thank you for joining us here on Magical Books for Kids. It's an honor to have you.
Thank you, Mike. It's an honor to be here.
Well, first of all, let's talk about your children's books. It's a series. 4 of them, the Blake Sisters Lake Tahoe Adventures. Could you first tell us a little bit about the series and what inspired you to write it?
Okay, the series covers the 4 seasons, summer, winter, spring, and fall at Lake Tahoe in both California and Nevada. And the first book is called When the Birdies Came to Tea. That's the summer story, which it's one of my favorites, illustrated by Kathleen Flanagan Cressa. The second book is The Winter Story, Mr. Snowman or Picnic Lunch. That's a romp in the snow that's fun. The third story is Nana's Tin of Buttons. That is the spring story, and the autumn story is Bear Cub Adventure. And I was inspired because actually my grandparents did build a cabin in Lake Tahoe on the North Shore. And the story has 6 sisters, and in the last book, another baby's born, that visit their grandparents' cabin. But mine is total fiction because my living sisters told me I cannot tell the truth about our lives there.
Okay.
I made it all up.
Oh, I guess that would be for a fictional novel, right? To change the names and everything if you were going to do something about real life possibilities.
Yeah, I changed all the names, and nothing in this book ever really happened. There's one kernel of truth. As you know, Mike, in every story, there's a kernel of truth in fiction. And it is true that the 2 older sisters are the same age 1 week every year. That's it.
Okay. So with these particular books, you mentioned Lake Tahoe, and I see it's a real big element in a lot of your stories, also your novels as well. Was that a particular place that you went to write, or is that where you find also inspiration, being in that cabin, or do you have a particular place you do like to write?
I love to write at Lake Tahoe. I grew up there every May through October. It was a summer home. The original Tahoe cabins were not year-round. It is now. And I have written 2 of my books there. My first novel, The Language of the Lake, and the first book, Birdies, was written there. I go there every year. I take writers on retreat there, and we do a week-long workshop and go to the Squaw Valley Community of Writers Conference every year. So it has my other heart for home.
Well, it's a wonderful place to write, and it's nice that you bring writers there. Is that available to the public, or is that something that you just do privately with people?
Well, my sisters and I did inherit it and kept it for years, but then I got outvoted to sell. And the family that lived 3 cabins above us, their 3 children now own it, and they let me go stay every year.
Okay,
I
so
go May, June, July, August, and September, and then October, our family goes for a week vacation.
okay, so when you do the writers conference, is that something that you put out there for the public to see if they're interested in signing up, or is that you reaching out to certain people to join you for that particular
The
week?
community of writers is public, the one in Squaw Valley. The retreat at the cabin is private invitation only.
Okay.
And
And
it's
you,
only 6 writers per week.
I see. Okay. Is that because of the living arrangements? There's only a certain amount of
Yeah,
beds
and we
available.
have comfortable arrangement, and sometimes people come for half the week or the weekend and trade off. So some years we've had up to 8, 9 people throughout the 8 days.
Okay. You mentioned too that you do a literary read at certain bookstores and everything like that. Is that a monthly situation that happens?
No, it's an annual event. And the first few years, we've been doing it for started with the group I started, Amateur Fiction Writers. Now I host it myself. It started back in 2009. And first we did one spring, summer, fall, winter, and then we settled on autumn. It was easier for the people. We used to do it at a place called Clark's Corner here in Ione, which was this incredible community hub. But we have been at Heine Company Bookstore in Jackson for 5 or 6 years now. They're lovely there. Upstairs, they have an upstairs there, and that's the Baker Street West Sherlockian place.
When did you first start writing? I've spoken to a few authors, and the last author I spoke to, she had written the Frozen 2 book for Disney.
Oh,
And I asked her, how was it to deal with Disney and all that other stuff. But the interesting part was when she told me when she started to write and draw, she actually illustrates and writes. And she said she was always doodling, always having a piece of paper on an envelope that from the mail. She would always doodle on it. Um, what was your experience as far as knowing that, yeah, I want to be an author. I love doing this. I love to torture myself with things like that, because we all do torture ourselves when you're writing a novel or we're writing a children's book, and we all have deadlines and we all have goals, but there's that part where you can't get that final end to a particular chapter or something like that, and it drives you crazy and it keeps you awake at all hours of the day. So when did you realize that you wanted to torture yourself so efficiently?
at a very young age, Mike.
Yes, okay.
Second grade, I had a great teacher, and she liked my writing. And my parents read to us since we were little kids. There was I come from a sea of sisters, and they would sit with us. They didn't just send us somewhere. And so it was time alone with my dad and my mom. And then because I'm 2 of 8, one of the oldest 2, then that fell on my older sister and I to start the reading. And it was encouraged. I went to a private Catholic school, and I had these amazing nuns, and they encouraged me because I was always getting in trouble for daydreaming.
Oh, how did I
Yeah, and
know about that? Yes.
yes, I was in trouble a lot.
So you were a natural born writer because you were already daydreaming about things, and like
Yep.
you were placing yourself in other worlds beyond where you were at that point.
Oh yes, lots out that window to imagine. So the first nun that encouraged me, she that continued into, I went to private high school too, and Sister Jane Golden was the one that really saw, because I was an essayist first and poet, and she's the one that told me I had a gift and I better use it. There
Right.
was no option. And the encouragement also came mostly from my dad.
So that was probably big. And being you of one of 8, where were you in that line of?
Well, 7 of us grew up together. I lost one sister as an infant, but I'm 2. I always say of 8, but 7 that live together. Never first, Mike. That's
Mhm.
my lot in life.
But were you the second oldest? Was that what you
Yeah,
said?
second oldest,
Second
second
oldest.
born.
Okay. All right.
No brothers.
No, but how did that happen?
I
Your,
don't know.
your poor dad. That's all I
Yeah,
could say.
yeah.
Dealing with 7 daughters. Oh my goodness, boyfriends and everything,
Hmm.
proms, and the poor guy. I was just thinking about that because I have 2 daughters of my own, and I thought that was tough enough. But 7. He certainly gets a gold star from me. All right. So, was there a particular book when you were growing up as a child that you read and always read? Because I know when I was reading to my daughters, if there was a book that they loved, I'd had to read it over and over and over again, and until I got sick of it. But was there a particular book in mind that you have with fond memories and everything like that?
I always loved Madeline, but they read books to us like Sugar and Spice and Everything Nice. That's what little girls are made of. The Secret Garden was my favorite because they had, would read it in increments. It's not a short little picture book.
Right.
And they followed that up with you name it. We were exposed to all the classics from a young age, and I always really read. I read every Nancy Drew and Hardy Boyce. I loved mysteries.
Mm.
And there was a book then called Trixie Belden, but my dad started The Secret Garden, and I loved the mystery of a little girl that was sick because I was so healthy. I couldn't relate to her, but the more he read this story, she became very real to me, and I immersed myself in her world. And then my sisters and I would talk about it. So it was like we had book club.
You had
Kids
a
book
natural, yeah,
club.
you had a natural book club. That's
Yeah,
wonderful.
it was. And we read all the other ones, we had all the Cat in the Hat, and my father, there was a bookshelf just for us girls. They had bookshelves everywhere, but there was the kids bookshelf where we were free to go anytime we wanted. And if we found one that was too hard for us to read, it also helped me learn how to read.
Yeah.
Reading and being read to helps you learn how to read. I would try to sound out harder and harder words. And it unlocks, like you said, this amazing world. Just,
Right.
it wasn't the one I lived in, but didn't have brothers, didn't have, anything associated that comes with that, which to us was a huge mystery.
Right, exactly. And you usually tend to dream in the worlds that you're not in, for sure, which is why when you when you go to school, to a Catholic school, especially with the nuns teaching you, that was not a very good requirement to survive in that particular atmosphere when you're thinking you're somewhere else. So, so yeah, I remember those days. Okay, so why don't you? I know you have a couple of books that you like to read, including one of your own. Why don't you read some excerpts from the book, some of your favorite ones, and you can certainly just give your thoughts behind it, especially the ones that the book that you've written yourself. Because to me, that's the most interesting thing I always find about authors. There's something, for some reason, it was much like when the last book that I co-wrote with my partner. It's The Lizard Who Loves a Blizzard, and it's basically coming from the standpoint is, okay, I've always found Australia fascinating because it's not really Christmas on Christmas Day because there's no snow and it's not cold. It's summer there. And then I would walk out from my Florida condo and I'd see lizards running across and everything. I said, I wonder if a lizard could actually snowboard, So I got into that mindset, and that's how the whole book developed there. And I'm sure that that's probably in some ways, shape, or form what happens to you as far as there's always some sort of inspiration, like you mentioned Lake Tahoe and everything like that.
Yeah,
So,
and that's very inspirational. Very. The first one was Madeline. My sisters and I were, for me, it happens in Paris. And my dad, we didn't know where Paris was, in France. And so it was a whole nother country all the way across the United States, because we grew up in California, and across a different ocean, the Atlantic. And it was about all these little girls in school. So I could relate to that. Madeline and then she had all these other adventures, but I picked the original, and I loved the art in it too. I'm also a huge illustrator fan.
so am I. I wish I could. I wish I could illustrate. I admire the people who can draw and illustrate and present art in such a fascinating way. I wish I could do it.
Me too. I admire them also. It is an incredible talent, and I do not have it either.
No, I draw stick figures. That's
That's
what I'm very
it.
good at. Yes.
My kids used to call me the stick people queen. But this one is not ornately illustrated. Madeline has kind of basic art, and the background is, yellow with black and white. But the story was so fascinating, your mind fills in the rest.
Right.
So here's the beginning of Madeline. And the author is Ludwig, I never could say his name, Blevins.
That's all right. I wouldn't be able to pronounce it. I'm glad you're trying, so I won't make a fool out of myself. So.
Yeah, my last name is French too, so I should do this more justice. In an old house in Paris that was covered with vines lived 12 little girls in 2 straight lines. In 2 straight lines, they broke their bread and brushed their teeth and went to bed. They smiled at the good and frowned at the bad, and sometimes they were very sad. They left the house at 9:30 in 2 straight lines. Now the book goes into color after they leave the house.
Oh, how interesting.
Yeah, it is. In rain or shine, now it's back to the yellow background, the smallest one was Madeline. She was not afraid of mice. She loved winter, snow, and ice. To the tiger in the zoo, Madeline just said, "Pooh, pooh." That was my favorite line as a kid.
Yeah.
And nobody knew so well how to frighten Miss Clavel. And I thought, okay. In the middle of one night, Miss Clavel turned on her light and said, "Something is not right." And so it goes into a medical mystery with this little girl. But I love the way the illustrator goes between the yellow background with the black and white and then brings in the color, and then it goes back.
That's a very creative idea. Yeah.
And I don't think I've seen it in too many other books.
No, I haven't either. And when you mentioned, I said, geez, I never heard of anybody doing that, but I'm sure it's probably been done before, but who knows? So Madeline obviously touches a chord for me too, is because my daughters were, always wanting to go see the Madeline movies and the Madeline books. We certainly had those in our house when I lived on Long Island. You mentioned Paris. Have you ever been to Paris?
Not Paris. I turned down an offer to go there when we lived in England for 3 years because I thought I'd always have time.
You were in England for 3 years and you did not get to Paris? Oh,
well, my husband was, I know, my husband's military and we were stationed there and I wanted to go with him for romance. And 2 other people asked me and I was waiting for him, but my dad had a heart attack. So I came home early because I didn't want to miss him.
Right. Exactly.
That's how I didn't get to Paris, Mike.
Okay. I've never been to Paris either, and that was on my bucket list this year. But of course, with the virus, that everything changed as far as traveling and everything. And I hope to get to Paris, London, Barcelona, Rome. I like to see those places.
Have you been to England?
I have not. I'm not. The furthest I've gone has been Aruba. Yes, that's the farthest I've gone. I finally got out to California a couple years ago, and that was because of my business partner was out there, and I had to do some things out there. So I have been to Sacramento. I've been to Los Angeles, as well as Burbank and San Diego. So I've been to those particular places. So I hope to do a little bit more traveling when everything eases, and hopefully we get through this whole pandemic situation. But
you've been to my hometown. Sacramento's my hometown.
I know you did, and I remember you mentioning Lake Tahoe a few times to me. So perhaps if I get an invite to
come anytime, you are invited.
Well, for a literary conference and to sit there with other writers would be like a joy, and especially at a place like Lake Tahoe and everything like that. Now, it was a rhyming book you just read. And
yes.
We just attempted our first rhyming book, and to me, it was a lot of fun. But it does take some work to do it. Have you ever tried a rhyming book, or do you feel like you want to attempt such a task?
Not a children's book. I used to write song lyrics too and poetry, so rhyme comes kind of easy to me. Mm-hmm. But for some reason, with the 4 children's books I wrote, they're more story books, so there's a lot more story in them.
Yeah, I mean, some people just have this natural gift where it's so fluid and everything, and it's a very different thing to do as far as writing a children's story as opposed to writing a rhyming story as well. Which I think what makes Dr. Seuss so amazing. I
Yeah,
mean,
he's fun.
right, but he also took liberty with words and things like
Yeah.
that, and I kind of applaud him because we sometimes we get like strangled with like, well, you're not supposed to write it that way, or here's the writing rules. And I'm always a believer is write a good story and forget the rules. Just write a great story and forget all the other stuff that people's telling you that you have to fit into a neat little box like everybody else.
I'm with you there.
Yeah. So, okay, so you
Definitely.
have another book, and this book that you wrote yourself. So I'm looking forward to hearing this.
I have a little, this one is When the Birdies Came to Tea. And this is, it was originally an essay I wrote for my Nana's 90th birthday because she had everything. And she told me, I felt so bad I didn't tell her it was made up. And she said, because I wanted to honor her.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
she said, Kathy, I've tried so hard, but I don't remember this ever happening. And I said, I'm so sorry. It's because it didn't. But I wrote it, to show what she taught me.
Right.
And so she said, well, then make it a children's book.
Okay.
And so I did. And she lived to be 100, and it came out 2 years after she passed. But
Oh,
it was, yeah, her inspiration, because I was happy with the essay. I was looking
right.
for the
Right.
perfect gift. And so originally I wrote nonfiction for a decade.
Okay.
So this is actually the second children's book I wrote. The first one's never been published. And so I patterned it after, it goes historically between 1959 and 1969 Lake Tahoe. And my intent was to keep that history alive and not let it get lost. And so there's 2 little girls visiting their grandparents. And I'll just go to the page with one line that I like. It's one of my favorite lines I've ever written.
Okay, great.
Nana and Papa built a cabin at Lake Tahoe when I was a little girl. My sisters and I spent our summers on the lake, turning a golden bronze under the bright yellow sun that seemed to melt like butter over the shimmering blue waters. Sometimes our parents dropped us off for visits in 2s or 4s. We entertained each other playing board games or going on exploratory adventures, winding through the pine trees on the property. Nana was the mistress of the cabin. Her red-trimmed paisley apron dangled like a royal robe on a brass hook near the kitchen door. I would stop and bury my face in it every time I passed by. I was never really sure if Nana wore the aprons or the aprons wore Nana. She had a way of making even the most worn-out apron look like an elegant evening gown with a row of pockets stitched across the front. My grandmother was young and beautiful. Unlike traditional gray-haired grannies, her shoulder-length dark brown hair was swept to the side with a barrette. She usually wore ski slacks and a short-sleeved blouse that framed her slender figure. Nana was free to cook and bake from scratch as she pleased. Bacon sizzled, eggs scrambled, hash browns fried, and toast popped out of the toaster on Nana's command. Yeast spreads rose to perfection during the afternoons, and hearty aromas floating through the cabin and out the door lifted Papa right off his feet and deposited him on the bench at the dining room table he'd fashioned with his own hands.
Beautiful. I'm sure your Nana would be so proud of that particular phrase. It was so eloquently written. Congratulations.
Thank you. It got edited a lot, Mike.
Well, we all edit, and we all get edited, and that's part of the process. The idea behind it, obviously, is the core of the particular story, and it's the emotions that you evoke. So I'm sure that if somebody read that particular passage, like I was thinking of my Nana and everything, and I was thinking about the days that um, usually around New Year's or around Christmas when everybody was over the house and there was that feeling of joy and serenity. And you knew at that moment it was the best moment in your life. And it's sort of like I got that feeling, that very nostalgic feeling when you were reading it. So, um, so beautifully written. Yes, we all get edited. That's part of the process. But in all, it's basically it's a fine piece of work, and that's all that matters.
You
So where can,
definitely,
yeah, go ahead.
sorry, definitely it has my heart in it.
Yeah, obviously, and you mentioned that it was a children's book. Was that a part of your essay, or was that something that you just
No, I wrote it for the beginning of this story because I thought all kids grew up and went to Tahoe. That when you go all the time, that's your norm. And I realized because I read it to classrooms while I was taking it from the essay format into a children's book. And one of the little boys told me, "Can you just tell me more about what it looks like?" That opening was his suggestion.
Mm.
And then he didn't have grandparents,
Oh,
not a single grandparent. And
right.
so for the kids that, we can't assume all kids have had what we've had. So I changed what I wrote to reach out to those kids too.
Yeah, I only had one grandparent too, and she was stationary basically, but she was the matriarch of the family. And when Christmas came, you went over to Nana's house, and your cousins were there, and there was this festive atmosphere. But everybody gathered around her.
Yeah.
But, while she didn't get cooked, but I could smell like the food and everything that you were just describing, and I could feel that atmosphere going, that festive atmosphere. So that's the skill of a well done story. So I think you should be proud, and your nana would be
Oh,
mostly proud, of course.
thank you.
So, and I think that's what we do. We write for moments, and we evoke emotions. And any great story, whether it's children's or a novel or poetry, it evokes emotions with people, and that's what we do. We take ourselves to other worlds, or sometimes we take ourselves back to a world that we miss as well. I certainly miss my childhood for sure.
Me
Uh,
too.
I mean, I just turned 60, so I'm thinking, oh my goodness, you start thinking those like Ernest Hemingway thoughts of like, oh my goodness, I'm getting old like Ernest, that type of thing. And you don't think of yourself as you don't think of 60 when you're 30.
No, you don't.
You don't think of it as when you're 40 or 50.
No.
But when you hit 60, you think 60, So okay, so how would people get in touch and see your work? Is there a particular website that you can tell our listeners where if they want to read more about your wonderful stories, where can they get in touch? Where can they read them?
All my books are on Amazon. My children's books are also available at lulu.com. And my website is just kathyboydfellure.com.
Okay, so
So
why don't we
Kathy with
spell
a
that for
K.
people? It's Kathy, right?
K-T-Y.
B as in boy. So I know I've been told I have a thick New York accent. So B as in boy, boy, as B as in Boyd, right? Yes. B as in ball, OYD, and then it's FELLURE.com.
Correct.
So Kathy Boyd
When
Fleur.com.
my third son, my youngest son, was a little kid, Fellure is not a common name, and everyone got it wrong. And so we would tell them, just say F as in Frank. And for a long time, he thought his last name was F as in Frank.
So it was Frank.
Yes. I'm like, no.
Oh
It
my
was
goodness.
easier because their dad always used military terminology, and that was hard for them. So,
Oh,
yeah.
okay. Okay. Yeah, I would have got lost with that too. But well, thank you so much, Kathy Boyd Fleur, for spending the half an hour with us here on Magical Books for Kids podcast. It's been a joy to have you here, and it's so nice to hear you read a couple of wonderful excerpts from books. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It was wonderful.
And I'm Michael John Sullivan. Join us next week for another podcast, Magical Books for Kids, sponsored by Magic Everywhere, Inc., a Florida-based company. See you next week.
Thank you for listening to Magical Books for Kids, a podcast sponsored by Magic Everywhere, Inc., a company based in Florida, hosted by Michael John Sullivan. This is your place to hear the very best children's stories and an opportunity to get to know your favorite authors. Join us for another fun storytelling podcast next week.